Ladies and gentlemen, you thought this day would never come. It's the last two-way of the week. I'm Mark Halperin, and this is two-way tonight. Love the pause. I've always loved shows that did that. And this is Jeopardy. Thank you for being here. Mark Short is here. National security expert, domestic policy expert, congressional affairs expert, White House expert, media expert, strategist, aide to Mike Pence. Wonderful man. I spent part of my day today with a former aide to John Boehner. And obviously, maybe when Mark Short comes on, he'll confirm this. But I see some through line similarities between Boehner and Pence. Maybe I'm wrong about that. He'll tell us. And my two-way colleague, Robby Soave, of the group chat is here, and they'll be here in a moment. We're focused on a lot of foreign policy stuff. Again, President up to his eyeballs in Russia, Ukraine, up to his eyeballs in Venezuela. Talked about Venezuela today and used the F word. And I don't know, this whole thing about people using profanity, I don't know, a lot of people struck by the president using the F word it was in the Oval Office, right? Yeah. Some
Cabinet room.
Say cabinet room, still in the White House, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, within the West Wing. So Russia, Venezuela, the shutdown, another day of war of words between various congressional leaders and the president on the shutdown. Hakeem Jeffries used language about Caroline Leavitt that's getting a lot of attention. The Supreme Court was asked for the first time by the administration to adjudicate the National Guard issues, whether the president can deploy the National Guard in Illinois. The Court of Appeals said no, so the Solicitor General took it right up to the High Court, and we'll see what they do with it. Here's a story some of you either know about or don't, but it's big in my world for a variety of reasons. Mark Benioff of Salesforce did an interview at the New York Times last week where he said, and he's a big liberal donor, and he said, yeah, we could use the National Guard in San Francisco. And a lot of public officials in San Francisco within the Times story, because the Times took their interview and went to them and said, no, we don't agree. We don't need. And Benioff said in the interview also, I think he said something like, I agree with everything Donald Trump's doing. It was a shock to a lot of people in his world. And today he apologized. Well, hopefully we'll have time to talk about that. And stuff going on in the New York mayor's race. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So if you want to be in on the conversation, you're here on the two-way platform. We'd love for you to be part of it. We've had some incredible participation this week, including on our special last night post-New York City debate. Raise your hand if you want to be on the conversation with Mark Short and with Robby. Please raise your hand. If you're watching on X or on YouTube, please, no smack in the chat. It's just so tiring when I get these AAI analysis of what's been in the chat. And it says 72% smack. So please, no smack in the chat. There's some stories some sound bites I want to play for you. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, as so often happens in this extremely well-funded program, here's a word from one of our sponsors, the good folks at Cozy Earth. Opportunity for you to benefit from this program's relationship with the good folks at Cozy Earth, who make bamboo sheets more comfortable and cooling than you've ever used, or they'll keep you warm in winter. They're temperature regulated. The Bubble Cuddle Blanket, it's a big fan of many members of the two-way community. It's a combination of comfort and style with distinctively textured bubble design. And if you buy one, you'll see it's not overrated, the Bubble Cuddle Blanket. It's just hard to say the name of it. And then, of course, they make lots of other stuff, including the famous pants, the now famous pants that I talk about as if I'm Donald Trump. The now famous pants. People are talking about the now famous pants. You can get 20% all of this by going to CozyEarth.com using the promo code two-way. The pants, the joggers, the shirts, off of everything. Tell them you heard about it, Cozy Earth, on two-way tonight. I don't know what will happen if you do, but they'd like you to do that, because home isn't just where you live, it's how you feel. Let's go home with Cozy Earth. Thank you for your attention to that matter. So nice of Mark Short, he is not Dickensian in his last name. He's not Short. He's in much demand. You could see this man on Meet the Press, Face the Nation, in the Situation Room, and yet here he is on the little bitty platform that we call two-way. Mark Short, welcome back. to this program. If you'd unmute, thank you for being here. And here's
Mark, thanks
Robby.
for having me back.
Here's Robby is also back. Robby, thank you for being here.
Hey
Mark,
guys, great to be with
what do you think of my comparison between Mr. Boehner and Mr. Pence?
Well, Mark, they were very different people. If you recall, back in 2008, after the Democrats had a historic election, Boehner actually reached out to Pence to invite him to join the leadership table and to run for conference chair. I think there's probably some who would believe that that time, Pence was one of only two members who'd been invited to speak the next year, actually, at the Tea Party rally. It was Mike Pence from the House and Jim DeMint from the Senate. And so Mike represented sort of that energy that was within our party at that time. But I can tell you that the two of them had an incredibly close working relationship. They trusted each other. And even though Mike was from a very different wing of the party than Boehner was, I think that there was enormous trust because when John was asking Pence to do something, if Pence couldn't do it, he would tell him in private, I can't get there. There was one or two Republican candidates that Mike felt uncomfortable endorsing, but it was always done in like understanding, knew each other. And I think that it facilitated their working relationship at the leadership table. And so I think they're still, close to this day, but they worked very closely for those couple of years they were in leadership together.
All right, brilliant. I love the history. I'll tell you the three things that I see similar between them. Robby, do you know those two guys at all?
I know who they are. I've never met either
Okay.
of them.
Okay.
It's the red wine and smoking. That's what.
No,
that's
no, it's
I
not-
know
it's
John
not that.
Boehner is well liked
It's
by
not-
a lot of
yeah.
libertarian Tea Party people
yeah,
who hated
yeah.
him at the time.
Yeah.
Justin
Well-
Amash always says he was his favorite speaker of all.
Yeah. Well, a lot of libertarians like him now because he's working on marijuana issues.
Right.
Although I'm told he's never had marijuana. Mark Short, here are the three things I see similar. First of all, as much as anybody I've ever covered, they're in public life because they really care about making the country better. Like they're really not that interested for two guys who rose to Speaker of the House and Vice President. They're really not that interested in power in my except for to be instruments of good. But they're not like sharp elbowed, like, seeking power. Number one. Number two, they're both hilarious. They're both just like really funny, and they both. Lastly, I trust both of their judgment about other people as much as anybody I've ever covered. Like if they say that person's a good man, as George Bush would say, I just think they both have really good judgment about other people.
Well, I appreciate. I think that's a compliment to both of them. I appreciate that, and I do think, as I said, there was a sense of trust among the two of them that I think they came from different political constituencies, but they were able to have private conversations and place their trust in each other. That helped our party have, in 2010, it was the largest landslide for Republicans in a midterm cycle with 63 seats picked up. I think a lot of that was because of their working relationship.
Yeah. All right. So there's some breaking news that's just occurred. And even though it's not as important as Russia, Ukraine, or even Brazil, according to the president on Truth Social, he signed a commutation releasing person X from prison. Robby, who do you think it is? Don't look at your phone. Who do you think it is? He's commuted the sentence of someone and released them from prison. Who do you think it is?
I hope it's not Ghislaine Maxwell.
It's not.
Mark
Short, who do you guess?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to give you hints. Ready? Here's the first hint. Former member of Congress.
Who's a former who's a former member of Congress who's in prison?
Same last name as Jimmy Smith's character on The West Wing.
What Santos? George Santos.
George Santos.
Oh,
George Santos. Who won? Shouldn't one of the three of us go pick him up?
Oh my goodness.
All right.
Wow. Good.
Meredith McGraw, who's on Special Report on Fox with me in 30 minutes, has tweeted that out. So I assume it's true. Mark Short, your instant reaction to the commutation of the sentence of George Santos.
I always felt that Santos lying to his constituents was reason for him to step aside. To what extent that's unusual today in Congress, I don't know. And so it seems like an aggressive prosecution, but it seems as well that there's a lot of commutations and pardons going out right now from this administration too.
Mark, we got the truth up.
Okay, here it is. Oh, it's long. George Santos was somewhat of a rogue, but there are many rogues throughout our country that aren't forced to serve 7 years in prison. I don't know that he was sentenced to being a rogue. I don't think that's in the federal criminal code. I started to think about George when the subject of Democratic Senator Richard Da Nang Dick Blumenthal came up again. As everyone remembers, Da Nang stated for almost 20 years that he was a proud Vietnam veteran. So here he's getting to the question of Mark just raised of lying to constituents. Having endured the worst of the war, watching the wounded and dead as he raced up into the hill and down the valleys, blood streaming from his face. He was a, quote, great hero. He would lead to any and all who would listen. And then it happened. He was a complete and total fraud. He never went to Vietnam. He never saw Vietnam. He never experienced the battles there or anywhere else. His war hero status and even minimal service in our military was totally and completely made up. This is far worse than what George Santos did. And at least Santos has the courage, conviction, and intelligence to always vote Republican. George has been in solitary confinement for long stretches of time and by all accounts has been horribly mistreated. Therefore, I just signed a commutation releasing George Santos from prison immediately. Good luck, George. Have a great life. The founders believed that the president's pardon power should be unfettered, and boy, is that unfettered. Robby, what do you think of this?
I can't say that I'm particularly against it. I'm a civil libertarian. I think prison is for people who are a danger to the rest of us, who need to be, kept at bay. I'm not trying to undersell the very serious fraud-related crimes George Santos was accused of, but is our community, is the country, are people safer because he's languishing away in prison? I don't think that's the case. So I am okay with him and probably a lot of other people, being charged, being sentenced, repaying their debt to society in whatever way is most appropriate. Maybe there's house arrest, maybe there's ankle monitors, maybe things like that. The people who assaulted the Doge staffer in D.C., which precipitated the crime crackdown, the National Guard in D.C. and elsewhere, those two individuals, 2 of the 10 who assaulted that Doge staffer, they just got probation.
Although they're minors.
They're 15, but they beat a man bloody, and they were part of a pack of 10 people who did it, and they're gonna get leniency. So
So I keep wanting to get to the big news about Russia and Venezuela, but here's more breaking news. According to Reuters, here's what a senior Hamas official, Mohammad Nazal, is he a big official? Do you guys know? You ever heard of him? Reuters says he's a senior official of Hamas, and he says Hamas intends to maintain security control in Gaza and won't disarm. He says Hamas wants the truce to last 3 to 5 years. Mark, let's just stipulate if true, because I've just seen the Reuters story. That'd be a serious blow to this arrangement. And according to what the president said this week, it means Israel will go back in and disarm them.
I think so. I think the reality is that I'm not sure that Hamas agreed to disarming throughout this process. I think that the hostage deal that the president negotiated was a tremendous victory and brought an end to a 2-year war. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. But I think there were always concerns that Hamas never actually agreed to disarm. And the governing authority to be set up in Palestine remains unclear. And so I think that the pathway forward to peace remains pretty treacherous, and so it's not surprising in the least that Hamas has stated this publicly, because I think that's been the case they've been stating privately throughout, is they're not going to disarm.
Robby.
Yeah, I think President Trump achieved something that is great in and of itself, because we got hostages freed. We got 20 individuals who were in horrible situations, got them home to their families, and that's great. So that's a major achievement in and of itself, if nothing else good comes of this. However, certainly we had the hope that this was going to be the beginning of a peaceful process that would result in better leadership for the Gaza Strip, leadership that was not Hamas. I'm not at all surprised that Hamas has no intention of going quietly into the night, and that there will have to be more fighting in the future, because why should Israel is not willing to accept the governance of a terrorist group on its borders. That's been its reasonable position from the beginning. It would not surprise me if we eventually get another conflict based on that. But in the meantime, I'm still happy that the hostages got home and we had peace for some time.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's talk about Russia. What we do know, President Trump met with President Zelensky today at the White House, and we'll show you some of what they said. The two big kind of unknowns now are the Tomahawk missiles going to be delivered to the Ukrainians? That seems at play now. The president today was kind of cool on that, Zelensky warmer. And then is the president of the United States going to meet with Putin in Europe? Both those unknown at this moment. Here is a headline from the Wall Street Journal, number 1, Sam, please, regarding the president's point of view. Trump says he'd rather end the war than send tomahawks to Ukraine. White House meeting with Zelensky comes a day after the president discussed peace plans with Russians. Putin. Number two, this is a New York Times headline. Zelensky says request for tomahawks is still, quote, under discussion with Trump. Here's the president saying he'd rather talk about the tomahawks and not send them. Number three, please.
I have an obligation also, though, to make sure that we're completely stocked up as a country, because you never know what's going to happen in war and peace, right? You never know what's going to happen. So we're going to be talking about tomahawks, and would much rather have them not need tomahawks. Would much rather have the war be over, to be honest, because, you know, we're in it to get the war over. We're selling a lot of different types of weapon, as you know, to the European Union. We're not in it for that. We're in it to get it over. We're losing thousands of people a week, thousands of people, Russian, Ukrainian, mostly soldiers. I mean, mostly soldiers. But we're in it to see that end. And if we can end quickly, and I think we can. I mean, I had a very good talk yesterday. We're going to be talking about it. But I had a very productive talk yesterday with President Putin. We'll see what happens. But the war in the Middle East was far more complicated. We got that one done. And I think we have a good chance. I think President Zelensky wants it done, and I think President Putin wants it done. Now all they have to do is get along a little bit.
Mark Short, I'm not, the appearance is the contrary. I'm not a CIA psyops expert on Putin's psychology. But if all that's happened since he basically played the U.S. after Alaska is that there was a vague, squishy, squashy talk of tomahawks, what would lead anyone to believe that he's serious about negotiating now?
I don't think that anybody should believe that. I think that Putin has been tapping Trump along, and I think he will continue to do so. I think, you know, Mark, you and I have talked about some of the significant departures in policy from the second Trump administration relative to the first. And I think that, you know, economically, seeing us now as a party embrace state-owned enterprises that make Warren and Sanders blush, and a trade agenda that is excited only by Peter Navarro and the most rabid unionists. I think the other piece of this that's the most shocking is the change in policy toward Ukraine. In 2018, you know, Donald Trump's rallies in the midterms, he would boast about the fact that we sent Javelin missiles to Ukraine, and all that Obama did was send blankets. There was a unification in believing that it was important to protect Ukraine from Russian aggression. And yet today, I think it seems like there's a willingness to abandon our commitment to Ukraine. And I think that certainly there's a lot of people, even in our party, who question what's the benefit of Ukraine. I think that the challenge is that for many of us, the concern is if you allow Putin to continue to advance in aggression against Ukraine, that will continue into countries we do have treaties with. And so it's not looking to send American troops to go to Ukraine, but is willing to help Ukraine defend itself. And here we are several years in this conflict that people said Russia would roll over Ukraine in a matter of days. And now it's 4 years later. And basically you've had Iran provide Russia with drones. You've had China provide them with resources and oil. You've had North Korea provide them with troops. Russia's hurting in this war. And I think that we should be arming Ukraine to allow them to win it and to push back against Russia aggression, not committing American troops in any way, but just providing the resources for Ukraine to defend themselves.
And Mark, just one more for you, and then I want Robby to weigh in on the same question. If Putin called, if you were national security advisor and Putin's national security advisor called you and said, if you do this, I will use nuclear weapons on Ukraine, what would you say?
Well, I mean, I think that the reality is that Putin responds to strength. He doesn't respond to weakness. And so I think we have to take any threat like that seriously, Mark, but at the same time, it's probably something that's calculated to get America to back down more so than it is something that Putin is actually.
But if you were national security advisor and he made that threat, would you be willing to take the risk? And
Well,
it's not some vague hypothetical. This is like why the Biden administration
Sure.
and even this administration is hesitating.
Well, yes and no. I think there's a lot of other reasons for the hesitation in this administration. Again, I think that what Putin has responded to previously has been strength. And if he feels like you're going to be weak, he's going to keep tapping President Trump along, and he's not about to abandon his aggression in Ukraine.
Yeah. Robby, are you at all seen anything to lead to believe that Putin would come to a negotiation to end the war?
I mean, not at this moment. I support and agree with Trump's approach to this by and large. I appreciate that my president is very inclined toward negotiation and peace and just wants to get this over with and was willing to walk Zelensky toward a place of saying, look, we're not going to conquer Russia and overthrow Putin and get back every inch of Ukraine. That would be ideal. I would support that outcome if it was possible, but it wasn't possible. That kind of wishful thinking that the previous administration had was not going to happen. So up to that point, I was like, yeah, we got to get them to reality because we can't have this go on forever. We just got to get it over with. But we got Zelensky on board with that. We got our European partners on board with that. We did that part of it. Putin has not moved despite a lot of favorable negotiation going on the Ukrainian side. So if that's their position, that it's all sleight of hand and they're really going to continue with this war because they really want to subjugate all of Ukraine, well, then someone who's willing to say, let's negotiate and have a deal that Ukraine won't love, but that's the best way to end the war. Well, then I say, you guys aren't serious about this. You're trying to conquer the whole country. Then you get fire and steel. Then we're gonna fight you and we're gonna make it difficult because I don't know what incentive we have to just lay down our arms if they're not playing ball with us. So I think Trump is frustrated. He doesn't want this to go on. He doesn't want to give them weapons. He doesn't want to be seen as encouraging it to go on. But if Putin is not going to play ball at all, I don't see what other option there is realistically. So I think he's weighing a very difficult choice and is correctly reticent to do it because we don't want this to go on, but Putin is not really giving them any chance, any choice in the matter. So I think it's smart to seriously weigh sending them the Tomahawks.
Right. All right. Very well said. Okay. I was going to skip over this whole Maduro Venezuela thing for just a moment. And today, in the aftermath of the New York City mayoral debate, Andrew Cuomo is understandably frustrated. I said three things happened in the debate to change the trajectory. Cuomo had to have the debate of his life. The moderators had to really hone in on Mondami, and Mondami had to kind of wilt under the pressure. None of those three things happened. Here's the headline from Politico. Cuomo is behind, and of course, this is definitely, I don't think any political strategist would tell you the path to victory is this. He's blaming Curtis Sliwa. The Republican nominee polling a distant third is becoming a scapegoat for the former governor and his deep-pocketed allies. It's true that I think, again, debate's subjective. I don't think anybody could argue that Cuomo won the debate or that he laid a glove on Sliwa. And Sliwa, at times, was very effective going after Cuomo, I thought. Let's polymarket what happened in the race. Polymarket bettors, where did they see the race yesterday? They had Mondami's chance of winning at, I think, about 89%. And let's see what the odds are now. Mondami's moved up in polymarket wagers who bet on all sorts of things, including politics. Mondami up to 91%, 8% for Cuomo. In all honesty, I'd like to interview those 8% because I'd like they got to be amongst the most creative bettors in the world that they've come up with a scenario at this point after that debate for Cuomo to win. All right, I need to go, and I'm going to leave you all in the capable hands of Robby to decide if he wants to talk about Hakeem Jeffries and Caroline Levitt and about Maduro and Trump. That'll be up to Robby. But if you want to get in the conversation with Mark and Robby, please do. Before I go, though, of course, I need to tell you about one more of our sponsors, our friends at Fast Growing Trees. Again, I've told you this story before, but so resonant in my life to go out and see a package on the doorstep. It wasn't 6 things of deodorant or 5 pairs of socks. It was a tree, 6 foot, almost 7 foot tall tree in a big brown box from Fast Growing Trees. They will help you. They'll ask you where you live and what your climate's like. They'll know that. But indoor, outdoor, what kind of tree you want. And the folks at Fast Growing Trees, no matter where you live, will help you find the tree that's right for you. It is extraordinary time to be planting. And again, you want to go to your neighborhood nursery. In my experience, very frustrating. They're not really good at giving you the information you need. The folks at Fast Growing Trees are. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com right now and use a promo code TWOWAY for 15% off your purchase. We use the code TWOWAY at checkout. Fast Growing Trees. It's perfect time to plant in almost the whole country, and they will give you great advice. And then the tree shows up right at your house in a big box, and the box is suitable for sledding. So if you save it for Christmas, you can use it for that as well. Mark Short, very grateful to you for being here. And I'll always remember I was with the two of you when I learned about the commutation of the sentence of George Santos. So it's special. But grateful to you both for being here. Leave the two-way community in your capable hands. Grateful to you all. I'll see you 9 a.m. Monday with Sean and Dan in the morning meeting. Thank you and good night. Robby, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. Let's comment briefly, since we put that chart on the screen of the Zoran performance. I just think I'd love to get your take on this, sir. I think Cuomo is hopeless at this point and has been for a long time. He's up against he has a lack of charisma. I mean, he's damaged goods to some extent. Zoran, I don't agree with any of his policies, but he clearly has some kind of pizzazz, some kind of his ability to speak very easily in long form, in short form. He's masterful with social media. And to some extent, it's like the ideas certainly matter, but the presentation matters. And I think the Democratic establishment, or the more centrist elements of the party, can't figure out, why are we losing, or why is the left, sucking up so much energy? It's just they have more charismatic messengers on behalf of them, don't they?
Robby, I agree entirely. I think that for a lot of politicians, it's hard to know when to step off the stage. And I think that Cuomo's, tenure ended in scandal, and it's hard to know what's kind of rehabilitated that image. I think the only thing he has going for him is to try to make the case that Mamdani is too far of a crazy socialist. But I think that's where the energy is, the Democrat Party today. And as you said, I think that he's a candidate who understands the game of social media today and is articulate in advocating his beliefs. I do think that, when Mark asks who are the crazy people who still believe that there's a chance for Cuomo, I think that the logic goes that there's over 1 million, Jewish voters in the city. And when Mamdani takes stance where he can't denounce Hamas, I think that people say logically that's going to happen. But I'm not sure that foreign policy is the issue that's going to drive voters in the mayoral race. And so I think that this is Mamdani's to lose at this point. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I thought his failure in the Fox News interview to say, of course you would disarm Hamas, from a candidate who 3 years ago tweeted that we should disarm everyone, disarm everyone but Hamas, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But to your point, this is not, foreign policy is not good. He's not running to be a senator for New York. He's running to govern the city of New York. Also, where young people are on the Israel issue is kind of all over the place, has moved from where even on the right. So it's clearly not going to be the thing that's going to motivate some new groundswell of people to turn against him. All right, let's go to the Hakeem Jeffries laying into Caroline Levin, and we'll get into some of the shutdown discussion. If we can play that element, let's watch that.
Matter of deep concern. Like, we've already seen a rise in political violence and hatred in America. And then you've got swastikas apparently appearing in the offices of Republican members of Congress. You've got young Republicans engaging in the most anti-Semitic and racist speech possible. Like, this is apparently who many of these people are. They are ripping the sheets off in plain view of the American people. Their words, their actions, revealing themselves in so many different ways. And then you got Caroline Levitt, who's sick. She's out of control. And I'm not sure whether she's just demented, ignorant, a stone cold liar, or all of the above. But the notion that an official White House spokesperson would say that the Democratic Party consists of terrorists, violent criminals, and undocumented immigrants. This makes no sense. That this is what the American people are getting from the Trump administration in the middle of a shutdown. So their actions continue to speak for themselves, which is why they're on the wrong side of public sentiment.
Question on a second.
Thanks. Yeah.
I like to begin all my calls for increased civility by calling my opponents demented liars. That's how we get off on the right foot. But he's obviously referencing this big story on social media this week that we talked about it on the group chat the other day, I believe. I talked about it somewhere on this program on Two-Way. This Politico story about the language these young Republican leaders were using in a private messaging chat app that was, that had contained racism and anti-Semitism and all of that kind of thing. Some of it was joking, some of it was not joking, very nasty. And, they're younger guys, but they're not like 15-year-olds. They're 20s and 30s. It's not that young. Mark, you worked for someone who modeled civility, I think, very much so, the Vice President, Mike Pence, who I think would, deplore this kind of thing. And I think it's appropriate to deplore it, without saying that there's no room for redemption or that only one side is guilty of saying things like this. I have noticed, though, young men, not even just young men on the right, young men I talk to or people of this age using kind of a harsher language, or I think it's a blowback to cancel culture and wokeness going too far and political incorrectness. And part of that backlash is healthy, but it's gone too far in some ways that will make them not effective as spokespeople for Republican messaging, frankly. What's your take?
Look, I think the political discourse today is far too coarse, and it is rough. And I actually thought, Robby, that your tweet thread on this was excellent about the young Republicans, and I think we should all be able to condemn it. But the challenge for me and the pearl clutching from Jeffries is that here we are weeks later since its surface, and not one Democrat has called for Jay Jones to get off the ticket in Virginia. When he calls to assassinate a political opponent, calls to slaughter his children and to have them watch the kids be killed, and not one national Democrat has called for him to step off the ticket, it just rings hollow when they claim, that they're tired of the sombrero tweets. It's like, how about you actually police your own side? I think that we should be condemning the young Republican text, but it shouldn't be that hard also to say that Jay Jones should get off the ticket if you're really going to be the party that wants to say that it's only Republicans that are inciting the violence, which we obviously know is not true.
Right. He called for violence against specific people. And in a text message he sent to the wrong person. I think most of us, like most normal people, have the reaction if you send a text to the wrong person, especially one that contains very serious you send even a joke to the wrong person, you're like, oops. And he doubles down and keeps going at it, trying to explain to a Republican colleague why he is justified in having this bloodlust. Abigail Spanberger not asking him to step aside. Do you think that's it's gonna sink him? I think. I'm not sure it's gonna sink her or not, but that race got a whole lot closer.
Yeah, look, I think that Virginia truly is a blue state today. I think a lot of people assume it's purple. It's not. I think that when Glenn Youngkin run a great campaign, it was in part because of the perfect storm in pushback against the Biden administration. But the last time we had a Republican governor, it was the year after Obama was elected. It kind of needs that kind of a perfect storm in Virginia. So I think the odds are in much favor of the Democrats. But I agree with you. I think that this story has broken through in a different way. And again, it's not like he's running for any sort of state house office. He's running to be the top law enforcement officer in the state. And I think that for a lot of Virginians, they recognize that Jason Miyares has done a good job as Attorney General. And I think that he's in a position now to win re-election. I'm not as confident across the rest of the ticket because I think it is a blue state. And I think that typically when you have a Republican president, it's a year that probably goes Democrat.
So the government remains shut down, although in my personal opinion, you would not be able to tell it from the amount of traffic I just drove through in DC. I'm like, did this thing end? It's madness out here. There doesn't seem to be much energy or desire to do something about it. I think Democratic leadership is kind of happy with themselves that they have been shown to be doing something, and it is, in their view, a fight over some principle that the left or that progressives care about, and so that they have, narrowly checked the box. Not that make the left happy is ever a good political strategy in my view, but they have kind of muted some of the criticism they're getting. AOC keeps getting asked if she's going to go after Schumer when that time comes. Her and Bernie were really angry about even having to address that on the town hall they did the other night with Caitlin Collins. But I think the left is a little muted in their fury with establishment right now, and just kind of more liberal voters who want Democrats to do anything are happy they're doing something, even if in the long run, certainly there will be probably a government funding again in our lifetimes. But do you think, I think Trump people, Republicans, MAGA are like, well, we want to shut down parts of the government anyway, so we will let this play out?
I think that I've been surprised at how long it's gone. I felt that in many cases, the shutdown was driven by the base of the left. And as somebody who's been a government employee during multiple shutdowns that were driven by the right, I think the media universally would condemn the right and say this is a Republican shutdown. This one's a little bit hazier for, I think, a lot of American people. And even though, 52 out of 53 Republican senators voted for the government funding bill and the House voted for it, it's confusing as to who's really responsible for the shutdown. Robby, I think part of that is muscle memory, that Republicans have driven most of the shutdowns before. But I think the Democrats, even though I think they're the instigator of this, I think they've done a good job of staying focused on the messaging of the Obamacare subsidies. I think they do feel emboldened heading into November 1st when the announcements of what those rate increases will be. As a side issue, I think that the Democrats were very shrewd in 2009, excuse me, when they basically went to insurers and bought them off by promising subsidies. And once you start government subsidies, unfortunately, very rarely do we actually turn them off. And so you've continued this promulgation of more higher and higher subsidies. And I think the reality is that, candidly, President Trump, was very uncomfortable in our first administration in the effort to repeal Obamacare. This is not an issue that he's very comfortable on. And so I think they know in the end he's going to want the subsidies extended too. So the longer this goes on, they feel confident. And meanwhile, for Republicans, as you said, I think, frankly, for the administration, they look at it and say, the president is striking peace deals in the Middle East. He's meeting with Zelensky, talking about trying to solve that issue. He has a huge summit coming up with Xi in early November. And so he's on a global stage where he actually looks bigger than Congress. And so they're not in a hurry to resolve this either. So I think this is going to continue on for a couple more weeks until around November 1st, when the announcement of the new insurance premiums go out.
It's weird times in my life when I'm more enthusiastic of the Republican president's foreign policy than I am the domestic policy. I don't think that's ever occurred before as a libertarian. Like you said, he's racking up, these wins, these deals that I think Americans across the ideological spectrum are at least happy about, or grateful for, or optimistic about. And then on the domestic front, it's a lot of, attempts still to deal with things he promised on crime and immigration, but that are causing legal issues. Is this even legal in the court? Can you send troops here? Can you do things? Can you just blow up boats in the sea that are alleged to be drug carriers? Now we've had that there were survivors that were rescued, and Rand Paul made this point the other day that, well, when they raid ships, every 5, one of them doesn't have drugs on them. So what does that say if we blow up that many boats? And I'm kind of a stickler for the constitutional idea that if we are going to go to war with Venezuela, if we're going to replace Venezuela's government, a rapacious, socialist, authoritarian government, no, won't be shedding any tears for them. But isn't there supposed to be a congressional role for that? We've totally set that idea aside forever. Congress does not want to do anything. It's just at the president's discretion. Congress will obstruct if they are of a different party than the president, or they just totally fall in line. Is not, what our framers intended, but maybe that's just where we are.
Robby, I probably have more comfort traditionally with Republican foreign policy as well. I don't think this is a traditional administration. I think it's really not hewing to conservative policy. I think that conservatives can be excited about the border policy. They can be excited about getting the taxes extended. But I think that the agenda is far more populist, and it's not really conservative. But having said that, I agree with your perspective here, in that I'm probably more comfortable with military action against those importing fentanyl, importing drugs that are killing Americans. But I agree with you. I think constitutionally they need to go to Congress to get that permission to do it. This isn't included in one of the previous authorities that have been given to the president right now.
Right. Just go get some kind of authorization, because I'm a very ideological libertarian, but I admit I live in DC. Crime situation was very bad. It was maybe not it's been oversold by some people, but it was no. There people get beaten up, get carjacked in nice parts of the city. You can't just avoid the part where the crime happens. It was bad, and now there are federal troops everywhere. And you know what? I will admit it. I feel safer. It is safer. There are gangs of teenagers are not just attacking people anymore, and that's an achievement of the administration. I don't know how else you can spin it, but they have the right to do that. DC is partly federally owned. There's cooperation from the mayor. Are we sending, national troops into areas that don't want them at all? And then as a taxpayer, I say, well, if they really don't want my taxpayer dollars helping them with their crime problem, should we do it? It's like always going to an 11 with this administration when like a 7 would be a great idea.
Robby, I think the governor Stitt said it best. Like, we as conservatives would go crazy if the Biden administration sent National Guard from Illinois into Texas. We would have gone apoplectic about that. And as you said, I think DC is unique. It's the federal capital. There is a federal role for it. And I think it's fine if the governor in Tennessee asks for support and clean up crime in Memphis, or the governor of Louisiana asks for help in New Orleans. But if the governor of Illinois doesn't want the help, or the governor of Oregon doesn't want the help, our recourse is the voters can vote them out of office and say crime is too high. It's not for the federal government to overrule the states and say we're going to impose our will on you. And that I think is a mistake. And I think if the roles were reversed, we as small government conservatives would be apoplectic about the notion of Biden taking National Guard troops from a blue state and sending them into a red state.
Of course, the hypocrisy goes both ways because no Democratic leader, mayor, governor would ever make a kind of states' rights argument. Well, not now, 100 years ago, not now, ever. For this kind of, it would never say, oh no, we get to do our own thing despite what the federal government wants. So it's really funny they would never apply that to federal civil rights law, for instance. So it's funny to see them make that point. Let's talk a little bit about the No Kings rallies that are going to be taking place. We got an element there to put on screen, and let's have Mike Johnson describing what he thinks the No Kings rally really is about. We've got that.
But tomorrow, this rally is not about freedom. It's about the opposite. For many of our Democrat colleagues, tomorrow is about creating really a spectacle. That's what they've been doing here every day of the shutdown with their little TikTok videos and their publicity stunts. And they're going to do it in a much larger venue tomorrow. And as the shutdown drags on, it's becoming increasingly clear that this spectacle is the reason the Democrats have refused to reopen the government. Just read a sample of the materials that this organizing group has circulated far and wide about the event tomorrow. They distributed talking points cheering on the shutdown. I mean, they're urging this on. They love this. They're cheering on Chuck Schumer's decision to close the government, and their lead organizer said this is his words, not mine, quote, "He hasn't surrendered yet. I call that progress." Maybe that's what led Chuck Schumer to say that every day of the shutdown gets better for us. That's what he said. Since then, Democrats have had their 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th opportunities to reopen the government, and they have obeyed the mob. They have listened to that. On Wednesday, this is pretty ominous. I don't know if anybody's reported on this, but you should. The lead organizer of tomorrow's event issued an open threat to Democrats in Washington, and this is what he said, quote, "The cavalry is coming in on October 18th, and they're either going to be celebrating you or they're going to be calling for new leadership in the Democrat Party." Now, I know who heard that. Chuck Schumer heard it. Hakeem Jeffries heard it. And their actions and their votes show that they are taking that as an order. Evidently, they've decided it's more important to show a fight to President Trump and appease this mob than to reopen the government and ensure the American people are taken care of.
I think some Republicans are getting maybe a little over their skis describing all of the protest activity going on against Trump as like it's all Antifa, it's all deeply organized, it's foreign funded. And I'm hearing a lot of that. Certainly violent elements at these protests should be dealt with, they should be prosecuted. They're violent elements at protests. I don't know how. I think there's a professional protesting class that tends to show up to events, and I actually don't think they're organized. They're very organized at all, which doesn't mean they're not dangerous or not violent or shouldn't be dealt with. I see a lot of, frankly, older Americans, older boomer generation liberals, maybe ex-hippies, the kind of people who show up to these rallies. I don't know that it's making any difference. I don't think Republicans are afraid of them or care that much about it, or that it's like, oh no, we're afraid of this means we think public opinion is against us, because public opinion still isn't for Democrats. There's not an exciting Democrat they can rally behind. But what's your view on the effect of the No Kings rallies?
Look, I think that Mike Johnson's done a phenomenal job as speaker, and it's an incredibly tough conference to hold together with that slim majority. And part of this is just messaging to keep his conference together against the radical left. And I do think it's a spectacle. Having said that, Robby, I do wish Congress would stand up and reclaim its responsibility to tax the American people, and not have an executive that unilaterally extends tariffs across the globe without getting congressional approval. I think our Constitution is crystal clear that the responsibility to tax and tariff the American people belongs to the legislative branch. And so I do think this is more of a spectacle, but I also wish that the legislative branch would reclaim some of the authority that it has been given the Constitution, and not continue to just assume that it basically abdicated to the executive branch.
How many of these members of Congress are actually listening to their constituents? Marjorie Taylor Greene talked about this this week or last weekend when she was on the podcast with Tim Dillon, saying what I thought were a lot of reasonable things, saying, you know, I hear people call me who live in my district, I represent them, and they say, love the president, I support the MAGA agenda. My business costs are going up because of these tariffs. I'm passing those costs on to my customers, or I'm delaying plans to expand my business, or I'm doing something that harms me, harms my bottom line, harms my customers. And that is happening over and over again. And if Rand Paul said the same thing, if they're getting those calls, if they're talking to people in their states, in their districts, who are saying, well, this is Trump supporters, people who love the president, are telling me that, well, this is hurting us. What are the rest of them doing? Are they not listening to their constituents? Do they think the danger of not going along with this is greater from that, like, very loud populist faction you're describing on social media or wherever else? Because there are definite ideological differences in the party, and I think that can be healthy, and those debates are being had. But there is pain resulting from that to small business owners all over the country who vote for Republicans.
I think it's especially acute, frankly, in agricultural districts in the Midwest, where they're most hurt by this current trade agenda. I think that members are hearing it, but I think the challenge is they feel like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because this president has shown a willingness to engage in primaries unlike other presidents, and he's flexed his political muscle to keep the conference behind him. And I think there's enormous fear that if they go against the president's tariff agenda, that they will end up getting primaried. I do think that shows a lack of courage in many cases from members, but I think that's the political dynamic that they're facing currently. And I think it could change after we get through primary season. That come next spring, if this protectionist agenda is as strong as it is right now, that you could see members expressing a different opinion, because at that point, they're looking to win over general election supporters, as opposed to being worried about primaries.
All right, let's get to a community member. Ryan, if you're still with us, step right up, unmute yourself, and thanks for participating, and let us know what you're thinking. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. The topics did come up during this. I saw a story today that was concerning to me. The fact that, we all understand that there are troops. The Navy is close to Venezuela. But I saw a story that actually one of the boats that was bombed, it was actually folks from Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm just concerned that our military is taking actions without having concrete evidence. We're not stopping these boats. We're just deciding that these are drug ships. And to say that not only are we discriminately bombing folks in general, but we're actually hitting folks from the wrong country, that's quite concerning. Another thing, it feels like ICE is been so emboldened. We're seeing videos of ICE vehicles crashing into other vehicles, frankly, endangering innocent citizens in our streets. talking about Chicago specifically, a city and a state that has not asked for this federal support. That is really another thing that is concerning me. I'd just like for you to address those two topics, please.
Well, yeah, with the strikes on those drug ships, or alleged drug ships, it's exactly like you said. You're giving voice to my own concerns, and the justification, again, if everything is, well, the cartels are terrorist groups, so it's terrorism, so it's already covered under our existing terrorism authority. That is, that this is kind of 9/11 Patriot Act sort of slippery slopes that really do worry me, and not just me as a unique ideological person, but worry the American people. The American people look back at some of the warrantless surveillance that resulted from that, what the TSA does to us, all of those kinds of things, and said, wow, in a moment of fear, I think maybe we gave our government too much license. And those things were voted on. Those things were decided in a fashion where the people making the decisions could be subject to democratic forces much more directly, whereas this is what the president just gets to decide this, and maybe it's justifiable. Maybe there is a clear reason for this. Maybe there's a clear reason for some kind of change of course in Venezuela. But if it's not being articulate, if it's not being voted on by the Congress, then how can we, the American people, decide how we feel about it? I think that is the danger, and it shouldn't be overlooked, right? The possibility of innocent people getting blown up. I think most Americans are worried about that even when it's the Middle East, which is much further away and a much more extremely messy situation where there have been votes and some justification because we were attacked to do something there. And people are still rightly uncomfortable about who are we drone striking? What did we just do? This is in our own backyard. Trinidad, an ally, now a government that wants us to take out cartel ships all over the place. They're like, drop more bombs, please. But also, I don't want to, it's the America First ethos is whose responsibility is that? Trinidad's problem. Is that Trinidad or is that ours? Mark, maybe you want to address that or the ICE component. On ICE, I think the American people have said they want more immigration enforcement, but is this too much? Does this go beyond what the people want if it's literally everyone who's here illegally, or just the people who are posing some problem to society, and then how it's done could pose civil liberties issues?
Yeah, Robbie, I probably get to the same conclusion on Venezuela, just travel a different path to get there. Again, I do feel like Maduro is an unsettling force inside our hemisphere, and I think that he's not a truly elected leader, and I think that he's an illegitimate dictator. I do think that the threat of the drug importation in the United States is serious. But, if we're going to say that the fentanyl crisis is such a national emergency that it's the justification for our trade policy across the globe, then if it's that big a national emergency, we should also be willing to go to Congress and say, hey, give us the authority to take out these cartels. And so I end up getting to the same place, probably traveling a different path than you do. On ICE, I think that Immigration and Customs Enforcement is doing the job that they were chartered to do. They are a national law enforcement agency, and I think that Democrats for years have written laws that basically give ICE this authority and expect it, but then want to bemoan it for political reasons. It's either if this is their charter and you don't like it, then change the charter. But I think that's the challenge for a lot of Democrats is they actually gave them this charter, but now they're actually enforcing the law. They're upset about it, want to bemoan it. And so I feel like it's ICE is actually doing its job. If Democrats are unhappy with that, then rewrite the charter what ICE is supposed to be doing inside our territories.
Yeah. We love the participation from youngsters interested in politics. Always happy to see that. Thank you so much, Ryan. Let's take another community member question if producers can send someone else.
How about Carly?
Yeah, Carly? Carly, why
Hi.
don't you mute and step right up. Thank you so much for joining us. Nice to see you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm just following up on what our last participant spoke about. I'm someone from the center to the right, and I can tell you that had I been able to vote when Clinton was president, I could have voted for him. I don't think he was as extreme. All the things that are happening now, he just mentioned, you wonder sometimes, are we just stepping over the line on so many things? Like, you keep taking law into your hands, you're going to have anarchy, what's going to happen. But at the same time, I think what brought us here, Obama could have done something so that Venezuela is not what it is today. And we didn't have all those people coming from the prisons to kill people here in the United States, all the drugs. So many things that have happened in the past brought us where we are today. But where's the limit? And that's what I worry about sometimes. I want to be safe. I work in New York City. We left the city because what de Blasio did, because of the crime, the rats, everything else. But it's so many concerns. So you want safety, you want law, and at the same time, we didn't have safety before. And I don't know that the law was actually followed. So where are we going to go? What's going to happen in New York City? I still go there to work. We're going to have a communist as a mayor. Enlighten me, help me. I don't know what to think anymore.
Right. Someone who, as recently as 5 years ago, said that wanted to abolish the police entirely, and now even so many left-wing views Zohran Mamdani holds that he will not denounce or turn away from. That one he does not bring up. I think he knows how politically unpopular it is. I don't know that he's actually changed his mind about it. He just doesn't talk about it. Which is just, again, bizarre. That's like the one. So the police are the one function that progressive left people don't want to spend more government money on. I'm usually happy to say, okay, can the government not spend so much money on something? But we need police services. Police services are only provided by the government. They cannot be provided except in the form of, like office security or something. Police services cannot be provided privately. That is the purpose of government. That's almost what defines a state, is its ability to provide police powers to engage to deter crime. Washington, D.C. has been just as horrifying, if not more horrifying in some ways, I think, than New York City, what I've seen here in my 10 years living here in terms of the decline on so many fronts. So and we don't want to turn over our cities. And I don't think Democrats want to say that our solution is nothing can be done about our cities. But Zohran is not running on that. So maybe he gets that, and we can be optimistic that that's not what he's going to want to try to do. But I don't know. I guess I'm not very optimistic. What do you think, Mark?
I mean, he, as you said, he wanted to abolish the police department before. I can't imagine New York's going to be safer within his mayor. But I think, Carly, that one of President Trump's political talents is to recognize that he takes a position knowing what the foil on the left is going to be. And so even though we can sit here and have a conversation on a podcast about the niceties of what's constitutional or not about going and sending National Guard in Illinois, he knows that forces Democrats in a position of saying crime isn't that bad in Chicago, or crime isn't that bad in Portland, or just as Robby just said, when they were arguing against National Guard in DC, they were saying crime isn't that bad in DC. And so it pushes them into that corner, which is what he loves, because then he can make the case that he's taking the fight on crime. And Democrats, do box themselves in by claiming that it's really not that significant an issue in our major cities, when I think for most voters, they recognize it is. And so that makes it a good political issue for him to utilize and to basically contrast where the Democrats are on it.
And DC, again, just to bring this up again, has shown what is possible if you make national resources available to a local community. And Muriel Bowser, the Democratic mayor of Washington, D.C., did not fight it and was actually grateful for the assistance. And we had what we've achieved in a short amount of time is positive. Now, a lot more needs to happen in DC. This is not a long-term solution. They need to hire more police officers. They need to close more homicide cases. And then you need a justice system that is not overly punitive, does not violate principles of justice, but actually does incarcerate or put in mental institutions people who are a harm to others, an ongoing daily harm, instead of releasing them over and over again. And I don't want to hear about, mental resources for them. Fine, but unless they are forced to do that, it can't be at the crazy person's discretion whether they're going to be wandering the subway or not. And I think that's something not all Democrats have been willing to reckon with. I think we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
comments. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Really appreciate hearing from our community members. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today on the two-way platform, manifesting that ethos of peace, love, and understanding. Thanks for letting me fill in for Mark Halperin, who will be back next week. And go check him out on, what is he on? He's on Fox right now, I think. You can probably catch the last 30 seconds of his comments. Mark Short, thank you so much for
Thanks,
joining
Robby.
us. It was really nice chatting with you. Bye, everybody.